Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I do hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I'm an author, and welcome to my writing space. Coming to you here today on yet another Storytime Thursday to read chapter one of my second book, And the Sun Burned Red. Um, it would really mean a lot if you were to leave your thoughts, comments, feedback down below. I would love to read those in the comments. It would also really help me and my channel out if you were to like, share, and subscribe, all that good stuff. As well as check out my socials, my website, which I have been posting regular writing updates and excerpts to, um, and also my books. As a writer, that would really be helpful and appreciated. So, without further ado, though, here I'm going to get started on And the Sun Burned Red. We have going into part one, Amjoh, chapter one, An Interrupted Hunt. An Interrupted Hunt. The city of Xiren, like a yellow scab upon the plain, was dying. Once it had been the dominant city on the Bayan plains, but that had ended hundreds of years ago, before the droughts began. Since then, most of the wells had dried up, and many of the buildings, built of mud and wood, were cracked and falling apart. Those who had not fled south to the sea or to one of the many other cities and towns, although they were faring little better, that lay along the rivers that ran through the vast plain, eked out a meager life in the few buildings built of stone. Farming was limited, and only on the banks of the river that ran past the city, due to little rainfall and the heat which burned the crops in the fields. So the people of Xiren relied on hunting and foraging. It was for this reason that all the young men of the city who had reached at least their 20th year were gathered in the courtyard of the Temple of the Sun to receive the blessing of the priests. As the red sun touched the spire on the temple, marking the start of spring, the priests bestowed the sun's power upon the hunters by marking them with a yellow circle on their forehead and splashing their spears and bows with blood as they filed solemnly from the courtyard. Among the most eager to go was a young man named Amjoh. Amjoh was the only son of a weaver who, in his youth, had gotten himself into trouble for exploring the crumbling and abandoned buildings that littered the city. Now he had been given the great honor of leading the first hunt of the year, since it happened to be his 20th name day. He was proud and excited for the honor, and he so boasted of it that even his friends had taken to reminding him of his lack of experience and training. Amjoh was a skinny man of average height, had a round and eager face and a short neck. He had jet black hair that was well groomed and fell to his shoulders. His skin was deeply tanned, which in the red sunlight made him look almost inhuman. Another reason he had been granted the honor of leading the hunt. With how thin he was, even he had to admit he looked a little silly with the ceremonial headdress, fashioned from the skin of a Traben, a fierce cat which roamed the plains. He also had a golden amulet around his neck, a loose, thin shirt and pants to protect his skin from the harsh sun, and the long, gilt ceremonial spear in his hands. Amjoh stepped through the eastern gate of Xiren to the cheers of the crowd that had gathered to see the hunters off. His chest swelled at the adulation, and if it occurred to him how ridiculous he looked at that moment, he did not let it go to his head. All the other hunters were filing from the gate behind him and forming ranks to wait for him to officially begin the hunt. When all the hunters had assembled, and there were several hundred, so it took some time, Amjoh turned towards the sun and yelled, "Mighty sun, we, the hunters of Xiren, pay tribute to your power. May all the blood we spill be an offering unto you. May our bodies, should you will that the beasts overcome us, be an offering to you. From you we crave the boon of a good hunt and plentiful meat to bring back to feed our people. This we beseech you, O mighty sun." The final part of the sacred vow was shouted 3 times by all the hunters. in unison, and on the third exclamation of sun, Amjoh hurled the spear with all his might in the direction of the now setting sun. When it landed in the earth, an embarrassingly short distance away, the hunters and the assembled crowd gave a great hooting shout and dispersed. The crowd headed back into Zyron to get out of the afternoon sun, and the hunters separated, gathered the provisions their relatives had prepared and waiting for them, and set off on their hunt. Having fulfilled his ceremonial role, Amjoh abandoned the elaborate headdress and took up a normal hunting spear, but kept the amulet around his neck. He slung a pack filled with provisions upon his back, strapped a skinning knife to his loose rope belt, and carried 2 canteens of water over his shoulder, first ensuring they were filled. These preparations were being made, he set off with 2 of his friends, Kylan and Manai, to the north and west of Zyron. They had been assigned by the lead huntsman to track as far afield as they could in that direction and, while spring was still young, see if anything could be gathered near the mountains before the Iron Men came raiding. They walked by the light of the great moon and used the little moon to guide them in the northerly direction they wished to go, and slept through the hottest part of the day beneath the shade of what few withered trees there were on the plain. They saw herds of Orlith and Paka, and even a pack of Traben, but did not kill any as of yet. They were still in the region assigned to other hunters and would need to be able to carry what they could kill in their chosen spot. On the 4th day from Zyron, they came to a thin string of trees only a few miles across that were watered by a thin river which they used to fill up their canteens. As they were settling down to rest through the heat of the day, Manai expressed his concerns about their destination. "I checked the map again last night, and they have told us to hunt dangerously close to the mountains." Kylan laughed, still superstitious. "The other hunters say that if you get too close to the mountains, you start seeing ghosts and spirits. And if you don't die of fright, you are never the same again," I responded testily. "Old hunters talk," shrugged Amjoh casually. "They were just trying to scare you." "Stories of ghosts might have been to scare me, but it's still one of the hardest areas to hunt." "And why do they pick us? We've never been on a hunt before." "Well," chuckled Kylan, "Amjoh here is the chosen one. They probably think his special powers will make this hunt successful." Manai snorted. "More like they're trying to remind him that hunting is harder than the priests make it sound." Both of his friends started laughing quietly at this point, making Amjoh blush slightly, but he tried hard to brush it all off. "Oh, go to sleep, guys. The sun is getting high in the sky, and we still have several nights of travel ahead of us before we reach the mountains." "Think we'll see any Iron Men?" said Kylan, with one last chuckle as he settled down to sleep. Amjoh shrugged. "They never come south of the mountains this early in the year. And besides, how dangerous could they really be?" With that, Amjoh and his 2 friends settled down to sleep. It was much the same on the following days. Manai grew increasingly worried about the stories he had been told about the mountains and all the terror they embodied. And despite his jocular attitude, Kylan continued to have nagging doubts, which he often expressed about what would happen if they met any Iron Men. Amjoh tried to keep his friends on task, and as much as he told himself it was all just first hunt nerves, their fears and doubts were beginning to nod him as well. At last they reached the area they were meant to hunt at dawn of the 8th day since they had left Zyron. It was close enough to the mountains to be able to see all the various crevices and pathways that dotted their sides. They were approaching a small valley with a small and fast-flowing river in it that seemed unusually green and full of flowers. They were still at least a mile off when Amjoh noticed this fact, and when he commented upon it, Manai pulled out a map and said it was simply called the Green Vale, and that the map noted that they should not go into the vale as there was never any animal life to be found there, and so near its source the river was fast and treacherous. Kylan started to comment about how strange that sounded when Manai, nervously scanning the horizon for any threat that might approach from the mountains, noticed a herd of Paka, a small, fast-hoofed animal with curling horns and short fur, feeding upon the yellow grasses. Spreading out as they had been trained, Amjoh and Minai circled wide around the herd, and at Amjoh's hooting call, charged forward and cast their spears, both missing at the herd, which caused the animals to bolt and run towards Kylan, who was able to bring down one of the larger females of the group with his own spear. Congratulations, called Amjoh, breathless from running after the Paka. As yours is the first kill of our hunt, you may take your rest. Manai and I shall skin this pack and prepare its meat for transport. My thanks to you, replied Kylan with a theatrical bow as he went and climbed a small tree that was nearby so that he could get a better view of their surroundings. Manai grumbled at being elected to help Amjoh do the hard work, but nevertheless took to it with some enthusiasm. His skills had always been more towards the preparation of animals for cooking rather than killing them anyway. The two men worked quickly, peeling the leathering skin of the paca off in long strips to be dried, removing the beast's head to let the blood drain out, and were just about to hang the beast up to the tree by its hind legs when Kylan called out. Look out! There are gray shapes he began, but was cut off with a soft thud and a strangled grunt. Amjoh and Manai were just rising when, with a wet slap, Kylan's body fell from the tree with a thin javelin sticking from his chest. The two men staggered away in shock and fear. When they had regained their wits, they turned to the east and saw half a dozen figures, each wearing a thick gray tunic and leggings, with skin a sickly, rusty orange, striding towards them, armed with weapons of black iron. The strangest thing that Amjoh noticed, however, was that each one had a thick iron ring tightly about their neck, with no noticeable way of removing it. The Iron Men, stammered Manai, who was at least able to regain his composure long enough to hurl his spear at the leading man, while Amjoh just stood still in shock. Manai's spear pierced the man's stomach. He kept walking several paces before folding at the knees and falling sideways. All the while he did not make a sound, and the other Iron Men wordlessly raised their weapons and continued to advance. Manai turned and fled, and seeing this, Amjoh was finally able to overcome his terror enough to turn and run as well. They were heading roughly in the direction of the Green Vale, and Amjoh was just about breaking even with Manai when, as if in slow motion, another javelin arced past his left shoulder. He tried to call out, but all he got out was a long W of watch out before the weapon drove into Manai's back, sending him pitching forward into the earth, where he moved no more. Amjoh ran blindly. Um, Amjoh ran blindly with all the speed he could muster, the sweat pouring off him from such exertion in the sweltering sun. Amjoh could hear no cries of pursuit, but it was always said that the Iron Men were silent. He was nearing the vale when he finally risked slowing a bit and looking back. The Iron Men were still running after him. They looked like dogs loping after him wordlessly. And even stranger, they did not seem to be affected in the slightest by the heat, so Amjoh kept running. As he was beginning to wonder how much longer he could keep going, he noticed that he had just stepped foot onto the green grass of the vale, and suddenly the world was filled with white mist. He also felt himself suddenly gripped by panic and apprehension, and the desire to flee away from this strange mist, which for a moment stopped him short of going on. Another javelin whistled past his right ear, stoked the fear of the Iron Men to a greater height than the fear of the mist brought about, so he resumed his mad dash forward. The mist seemed to resolve itself into shadowy figures who warned him of the dangers of going forward, but still he pressed onwards. Finally, as if stepping from a dark room into the sunlight, the mist vanished in an instant, and Amjoh was greeted by a truly remarkable sight. All around him was, as far as he could see, a great city of domes and arches built of gray stone, and a grayish metal that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Everything was inset with crystals of every size, color, and description that Amjoh could think of, and then some. He was standing in a large square that seemed to be the entrance to the city. There did not seem to be many people in the square, but what people there were that were there seemed odd. They were exceptionally tall with unusually proportioned arms and were wearing robes of various hues. There was something else odd about them as well, but he was not given the chance to determine what this was before a javelin bounced off the smooth paving stone next to him with a sharp clatter. Amjoh threw himself forward and rolled behind a tree with red bark of a kind he did not recognize, which was lucky because another javelin embedded itself in the earth the tree was growing from. 5 ironmen strode into the square with their iron swords drawn, and they advanced upon Amjoh menacingly. They were close enough now that Amjoh could see their iron gray eyes. The one who seemed to lead them raised his javelin, took aim, and hurled it. The weapon hit Amjoh in the right shoulder, throwing him to the paving stones. "Help me! By the sun, help me!" screamed Amjoh in pain as he scrambled backwards from the silent killers advancing upon him, while trying desperately to wrench the javelin from his shoulder as blood poured down his side. The lead Ironman had just about reached Amjoh when suddenly he was replaced by a pillar of fire, from which his charred skeleton collapsed seconds later. The other Ironman stopped and looked around for his attacker. One of the strange men, who was wearing a robe of light blue, calmly strolled past Amjoh, waved his left hand casually at them, and one by one, they too burst into flames and fell. While the last charred while with the last charred skeleton clattering to the gray stone, the man gave a nod of satisfaction and turned to Amjoh. Amjoh's vision was beginning to blur with exhaustion, fear, and blood loss, but he could make out that the man had a long and graying beard, which came down to his chest, bright red eyes, and a strangely shaped forehead. The man leaned in, tugged the javelin free, and examined it until Amjoh fell backwards to the ground and groaned in pain. By this point, his head was swimming, and he could feel himself losing consciousness. The last thing he heard was a deep voice saying something that sounded reassuring, but which he could not understand. And that is chapter 1. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I would love to hear your comments and feedback down below. Once more, it would be amazing if you were to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, as well as check out my book, socials, website, all that good stuff down below. That would be amazing. It would really help me out. But in the meantime, I do hope you all have a great rest of your day, get a chance to do or experience something creative, and I'll catch you on the next one.